Good evening. I'm your host, Sundiata Chajua, and this is Real Talk History as a Weapon for Black Liberation. And today we have a special guest, very special guest, Too Black. Too Black is a low wage worker, a poet, scholar, organizer, and filmmaker who blends critical analysis with biting sarcasm. He has headlined various stages and events, including the historic Nuyorican Poets Cafe in New York City, Princeton University, and the Johannesburg Cafe and the Johannesburg Theater in South Africa. He is the author of the book Laundering Black Rage: The Washing of Black Death. Excuse me, the washing of Black death, people, property, and profits. This was co-authored with Dr. Rasul Mowat. His words have been published in online publications such as Black Agenda Report, Left Voice, Blacktivity, and Hood Communists. He is currently the host of the Black Myths, the co-host of the Black Myth podcast, which debunks the BS that's said about Black folk. And he was the producer of the Last Dope Intellectual, an unapologetically radical Black web show hosted by Dr. Sharice Burton Stelly. He is a member of the Defense Committee to Free the Pendleton II, and he is the director of a film on the Pendleton II entitled The Pendleton II, They Stood Up. Let me bring my brother Too Black. Brother, welcome. Welcome. It's a pleasure. I really appreciate you coming on my show.
Thanks for having me.
As you know, I'm a devotee of the recently passed Dr. Bill Cross, who developed the negrescence theory of Black identity development. And at the core of Cross's theory is the idea that there are various phases or stages that one evolves through as one develops a Black political consciousness. So I've shaped this show in at least the first part of the first 30 minutes or so around trying to excavate the political social development of my guest. So correct me if I'm wrong. You're not only based in Indianapolis, but you're from Indianapolis, born and raised
Actually, no,
in Nap City.
I'm actually from a smaller city, Muncie, Indiana, and then
Ah, Muncie.
as an adult, I've spent most of my time as an adult in Indianapolis.
Okay, so what I want to try and get at is this. So you're born and raised in Muncie, come to Indy as an adult. Can you talk to me about how your class background, being raised in Muncie, which is a small industrial town, right?
Yeah, it's post-industrial now. It's one of
Yeah,
those places.
post-industrial
Yeah,
now. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
um,
yeah.
Place and the time period that you reached maturity. Can you talk about, along with your class background, that during that period and in that place, Muncie, that you reach political maturity? What's going on? What are the forces that drive you to develop the political consciousness that you now have?
Yeah, Muncie is interesting because, like you said, it's not a big city. I think I don't know what the population was growing up. It used to be, like you said, an industrial city. So Ford and Chevy used to have big plants in the city, and that was a major aspect of it. It's now basically just a college town for Ball State University, which is where I went to college. It's and much of the side of town where the industrial base was is the poorest side of town now because a lot of that stuff that got built, in a complement to it is all gone or worn down. So I grew up in that transition, right? So my mother did work at Borg Warner once upon a time, and
Mm,
then she lost her job, because of the I think NAFTA was tied to that. NAFTA's in the early 90s, but the jobs don't immediately just die right when they sign the trade
right.
deal. They kind of gradually start to shift. So she was in a union, and that was probably the time of life where we had the most money when she was working there. And then my father worked for the city, as a he worked with the sewer department. So he wasn't a garbage man, but he worked like he was the people that like investigated the sewers and helped put them in the city and stuff like that. So very working class. Didn't come from any real petty bourgeois situation or anything like that. But as those jobs once upon a time, particularly those union jobs, they paid pretty
Oh yeah,
well. So once
absolutely.
that drops off, when I think about looking back as a kid and I think about seeing the material conditions kind of decline, in terms of where we lived or what we had access to or what we were eating, it tends to coincide with that. My mother also got injured at the job too. Both of them got injured. That's
Okay.
another thing. As I get older, I can relate more, even especially having a kid now. So one of them had back problems, the other one had feet problems, and because these jobs take like a lot out of your body you know.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
I got to see that. And these are things that are happening. You don't really know what they mean at the time. You just know, like where you live gets smaller, right? Like in terms of literally, have we had to move, or you get evicted or something. And this is not to paint a picture that everything was bad and I was just in
Right,
dire
right.
straits the whole time. I'm not trying to paint that picture, especially out of respect for my parents. But I'm just saying these are the kind of conditions that I was noticing, and then I also grew up in church, so I got to see that. I think that
Which
was the early.
church? Which denomination?
I was actually non-denominational with apostolic leanings, but
Okay.
but but um but so I think that's where I really noticed the class kind of internal class divisions was in church because my
Hmm.
father, I don't really talk about it often, was a minister, um, but he wasn't. Our church wasn't that big, and he wasn't a mover and shaker. And he often
Right,
got
right.
put out of those rooms because he wasn't into that. He was just trying to do what he thought was right. So you got to see the how those pastors, those black pastors who were more the movers and shakers, that was the people that the mayors went to, right? That was the people
Hmm.
that the community turned to. Like these are the things that, I've noticed and I really didn't like those dudes, but I, I didn't fully understand why as a kid. But I'm noticing, these are the people that these are the people who are shaping kind of my understanding. So when I started listening to Malcolm X speeches, that was one of my first kind of introductions.
How old were you?
Probably my teens, the first time I ever heard him. Um, Maybe even a little younger. My grandfather, who was in Ohio, he he had passed, but he had left behind some books, and one of the books was Malcolm X speaks.
Yeah.
And that was one of the first times I got introduced to his speeches. And then as the internet, thinking about, even I'm a millennial, so technology is also evolving. So
Right, right.
I'm able to access speeches in ways that other generations couldn't. I didn't have to go buy a record. I can
That's
find
right.
it online. Now this is prior to like YouTube being a big deal, so you had to go to like specific
This is
websites.
mid 90s, right?
Mid 90s, 2000s, right? So like
Yeah.
when I get older, so when Malcolm starts talking about like the house Negro and the field Negro, like my first point of reference was church. You know, like
Mm.
that was where it clicked for
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
So it's like I was
yeah.
like, oh, that's who those people are. Like that actually made sense for me because I saw, how they operated, and some of them weren't all bad guys. It was just they just had a certain position in that, particularly
Yeah,
in a
the
small
structural
city.
role.
Yeah, and in a small city where you don't have as many competing forces as you might have in like where I'm at now in Indianapolis or even a bigger city like a Chicago. So churches really, black churches really hold a lot of weight, in the area because you might have one civil rights organization like an NAACP or
Right.
something, and then you just have a bunch of churches, and a lot of times those organizations will cross over, like they're members in both or something like that. Um, so I'm seeing that, and then like my brother is kind of labeled like the problem child. So even seeing how they were trying, like there was a way that people around me were trying to develop me into the more, the good black kid or something, because I
Hmm.
had good grades and he didn't. So we kind of got pitted against each other, and I got to see, all of those things. So I guess
Who
like
was
more broadly,
older?
I was the older one, yeah.
Okay.
2 years older. So more broadly, I'm seeing like deindustrialization, globalization is happening around me. Um, the black church and the politics of that, some exposures to the streets. And then also I was an athlete. I wasn't that good, but I did play a lot, still watch it, played a lot of basketball. And that's really what exposed me to, I always say that's what like socialized me to be like as black as I am, was like playing basketball. Because growing up in
Hmm.
like church, you're very like, especially in my situation, you can be kind of sheltered. So basketball was the only way I could really like just go and be in the neighborhood and not have to worry about them asking questions about. I could go play here. I could just, and that's how I get introduced to the music and all of the other things, poetry and everything else, is by just playing basketball because everybody's rapping the songs, we listening to the music, we playing with the girls, like all of that different stuff introduces me to the neighborhood. I think more than anything else did. So I hope that answers the question, but that's kind of like,
No, it does. It does. But I want to dig a little bit deeper.
mhm,
And this question may come off wrong, and it might just be a stupid question,
mhm.
right? But as you became politically conscious, are you using the new knowledge to analyze society? And to what extent are you using it to analyze your own lived experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think the odd part about being from a place like Muncie is a lot of analysis. I think sometimes the flaws, people's, even particularly the racial analysis, they base it off of a bigger city.
Hmm.
So they'll base it off of black people that don't really come in contact with white folks very often. And when you're from a smaller city, if there's white people there, you're gonna be in contact with them because your neighborhoods ain't that big. It's a smaller city, so you're
Right,
always gonna be
right.
in contact with white folks, even if you don't live next door to them or whatever. You're always gonna be in contact with them. So there's a different experience. When I got to like college, and I'm meeting black folks in bigger cities, and they would always talk about this culture shock because they had never really been around white folks, and for me,
Right.
that just really wasn't that really wasn't a culture shock
Yeah.
for me. Now, the type of white people was a culture shock because I grew up around working class, kind of redneck type white folks. And then I get to
Right,
college
right, right.
and I'm around these more, petty bourgeois, like white liberals, right? And I hadn't really grown up around a lot of them because I'm from like a union city and that kind of stuff. So those are kind of white liberals I knew was the kind of more old school Democrat types. Um, so I would go back, when I think about like even when we got evicted and I learned about I mean, because the 2008 crisis happens, right? The financial crisis, which a lot of that was driven by subprime loans, and that's what we had. I didn't
Hmm.
know that, you know, that it was driven by tricking people into thinking they can be homeowners, and then they sign a loan they don't really fully understand, and then now they get evicted and their house is foreclosed on, right? Like so that happened to us. So I got to see that um, just by like living it, but I didn't really even fully understand it because a lot of that was explained to me through religion or something like that. So when I got older, I got to understand more the material things behind it and how you get caught up in it and credit and all that. So I always applied it back to my conditions, even when I'm talking about
Hmm.
church and listening to Malcolm, and always applied it back to those conditions, but also thinking about sometimes you got to also theorize on top of those things you read. Because, like I said, in some cases, um, the months being from a smaller city with 40, 50,000 people, the analysis doesn't always fully translate to the way people might analyze like an Indianapolis even or
Right.
Chicago or a Memphis or something. Like it doesn't necessarily translate entirely. You gotta stretch it a little bit to make it make sense for your particular situation.
Okay. Yeah. In some degrees, I come out of a smaller industrial city as well. That boy, deindustrialization and deproletarianization hit it hard. Decatur, Illinois, but
Hmm.
it was 100,000 people and about 10 to 15%, 20% black over the course of my life there. And what's interesting is that again, our neighborhoods weren't that large,
Yep.
but we did have these blocks, right? And
Hmm.
black people lived in all four quadrants of the city, but the largest block was the south side part. And in truth, we saw white people when we went to the store,
Hmm.
when we went to school.
Hmm.
And even though we were in the same classrooms, there wasn't, as I look back, we didn't really interact.
Hmm.
When recess came, we was with black folks. When lunch came, we was with black. So it was an interesting thing. But like you, I, I know white folk, right? In a
Yeah.
way that somebody from the south side of Chicago don't know white folk. I
Right.
know
Right. Yeah.
these
Yeah.
mugs. Yeah,
It's yeah, it's just different. Yeah, it's like I
yeah,
know them. Yeah. Whether they were my
yeah.
best friends or not, I was around them. We
That's
played,
right. I was in the
and
classroom with them suckers.
yeah, and in my
I
case,
played teams
playing
with them.
sports, you interact with them on that front. That's the main way I really interacted with white folks is through sports. So yeah,
Yeah,
like it's
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
different.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. So I want to take up this question. You're a poet,
Hmm.
and I'm placing you in that hip hop milieu because you're millennial. But you didn't talk to me about spoken words. You said poetry. So how did you get interested in poetry and not just hip hop? How did you make the direction straight to poetry?
I mean, hip hop definitely played a major role because I think that is a form of poetry.
Yeah.
So I think the way I got into poetry is not really that interesting. It was like I was in a health class, and it was actually my basketball coach. And he didn't. You know how you had those basketball coaches or sports coaches? They don't really teach. They just got a job at the school or something. So he had
Yeah,
us,
yeah.
yeah, he had us write some poetry, and I don't know, something just clicked, and I was just able to rhyme a lot of words together, like just naturally. It didn't really take much. It just kind of clicked out of the blue. Um, and from there, I just kept writing. So I got notebooks for days, and from my
Mm,
teens, just writing poetry, and then I'm also at the same time I am listening to a lot of hip hop and developing my style, a lot off of that. A lot of people who perform spoken word, most of them had some influence of hip hop,
right, right.
particularly from my era or whatever. So it's kind of a mixture. And then as I get older, I actually start reading real poetry. But for a while, the what I knew was just hip hop, because I didn't know. I mean, you got the stuff they give you in school, Edgar Allan Poe and stuff like that. But and
Yeah, yeah.
I always thought that was cool, but I didn't really maybe appreciate it in the levels I do now. But poetry just became, I always say it's like another language, right? It's a different language, and once you learn that language and how you're gonna speak it, you can translate a lot of things that otherwise people may not be interested in. Especially back then, we didn't have podcasts and long
Right, right.
conversations and stuff. So you had to be able to transform or translate, more complex ideas, poetry, and particularly the open mic scene where I really
Hmm.
came up. That was and it's different now. Like there used to be an open mic like every day in Indianapolis. Like there was a time, even around the country, where there was a lot of open mics,
Yeah.
and you could go to them all the time, and there was a lot of different poets. It's not so much like that. So the open mic world, as I got older, I spent a lot of time just writing. I didn't perform for years, and then as I got older, like once I got into like I think 1920, I actually started performing, and then that became the primary way that I got it out. But for years, I was just writing, and then performing. I think Kanye actually said it. There, I quote him, but he said something about his art. He's because he was a visual artist, and he was like visual art was cool, but he said I could. It's like I couldn't turn it up loud enough, and that's kind of how
Yeah.
writing
Yeah.
poetry was. It's like it's great to write. I mean, I'm still a writer at heart, but performing is like I get to turn it up in a way that I can't turn it up by just putting it on a page. Like I get to articulate it with a different kind of ethos versus when it's just on paper. But
You
at
know,
the core,
Fanon
I'm a writer. Say what?
Fanon said that poetry was the most immediate of the arts,
Hmm.
and that it was the art that could most impact politicalization because of its immediacy and the emotional content that it could carry.
Yeah, you don't need a. I mean, you don't need any instruments. You can use them, but
No.
I'm saying the
Yeah.
beauty of it is you really could just show up. Like when I go somewhere, I don't perform nearly as much as I used to. But if I would get booked somewhere, I would sometimes I would laugh because I'm like I really don't have to bring anything other than a suitcase. You know, like
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have to
Yeah.
play. I don't need
Yeah.
a DJ. I don't even need a beat. You know what I mean? Like I literally just go up there and do the poetry, and that's all. So yeah, the immediacy is just you just go directly to it. It's just straight out the mouth. Like there's no extra anything. We can do it with music, and I've done it with music,
Right.
and
Right.
I enjoy that. But really, at the core, you're just reading it, or you're performing it.
Did you ever get into something like Addison Gale's "The Black Aesthetic"? As a theories of black poetry or theories of black writing, and I'm using Gale as preeminent example from the Black Arts movement.
Yeah, the black aesthetic. I remember reading about that. I think that was a college thing. I remember reading about that,
Yeah, yeah, it would have
and it was
been.
one of
Yeah,
it was one of them things I got connected with. It's also what was it? What was it? Larry Neal.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, yeah. Larry Neal had a similar
yeah,
piece. Yeah, yeah,
that's how
absolutely.
I think that's how I was introduced to it was through Larry Neal's work, and then Amiri Baraka is always say that's my
Hmm.
favorite. It's my favorite poet. Because I feel
Yeah.
like poets should be respected as like the best of us should be respected, not as just entertainers, but as intellectuals, as organizers, activists. Like and Amiri Baraka, I think, really embodies the full spectrum. I mean, this is somebody who could write long form. This is somebody who
Oh,
could perform. He could get in front of
yeah,
music. This is somebody who could write poetry. This is somebody who organized. Like Amiri Baraka, I feel like
absolutely.
just hits all the different points that a poet should be able to hit. Like he wrote one of the better history books on jazz. Like he's just like I feel like he's and his life is
Mm.
interesting because he went through these phases too, so you get to read
Yeah.
about him in these certain phases of his life when he was more like a liberal hippie kind of. You get to read Leroy Jones. Leroy Jones' work was good too, though. People sleep on the Leroy Jones.
Oh, look. Blues
Yeah,
People is still the best book on the blues,
yeah.
right? And amazingly, given when he wrote it, it really does reflect a strong class analysis. And it's, you read Blues People, and then it's hard to explain the cultural nationalist phase because it seemed like a step backward, right? But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Barack has always been one of my favorite people, uh, period, right? Though I'm more gravitated in terms of poetry. And maybe I was a bit weird, but when I was 15, 16, I had poetry books from Donnell Lee, who became Haki Matabuti, and Nikki Giovanni. and their poetry I thought was more immediate
Mm.
than say Baraka's. But of course, by the time you get to the '80s, Baraka's Marxist poetry is just, you know,
Yeah.
nirvana. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Dope.
So
Dope is one of my favorite poems ever. Like I've performed that, and, and putting that to stage is rough, but Dope is just amazing to me. Like the way he plays the dope fiend, and I just yeah, that,
no, Baraka's capacity to perform his poetry.
yeah,
I mean, I seen him just take a lecture and just turn it into a musical instrument. Yeah,
yeah,
Baraka's a man. Yeah, yeah, you don't get better. Um,
nah,
so I want to ask you something about the motivation that led you to co-create the Black Myths podcast. I mean, I think that's some dope. I love what you guys do.
thank you.
Um, so, was there a particular myth that just irked you and ate at you, and you said, "I got to do something," or was it just accumulation of the foolishness that's out there that's confronting our people?
I think it was the accumulation because it originally was like a joke. Like I was like, I'm just gonna do a show debunking all the bullshit that I keep hearing. It was kind of a joke. I would joke to Rasul about it and a few others, and then and then we actually sat down and made it a real thing. But yeah, I was just tired of hearing. It's been a while since we've been doing it for years. I got to kind of go
Yeah,
back to even what the particulars were back in like I guess this is like 2018, 2019 prior to us starting, and it was just I mean the first one we actually ever recorded, we didn't end up putting it out, was on Willie Lynch.
I was
Uh,
that's when you said 2018. I was saying that's when Willie Lynch had
yeah,
almost cemented itself as gospel in our community.
Yeah, that one. At that point, I knew about the kind of some of the black capitalism myths. There was a lot of health myths, I think, that were rolling around. I think people have taken black don't crack too far. And then I had my cultural nationalist phase, I guess, for lack of a better term. I'd rather call it that than Hotep or whatever. But like
Yeah,
in terms of the like I used to read like Francis Quest Welsing and some of that stuff, and now I find a lot of that to be a lot of those theories to be ridiculous, and be honest with you. But like,
brother, we all go through that phase.
yeah,
I actually taught Cress Welsing in,
man,
in one of my Black Studies classes, but by that time I was teaching to debunk, right? But the
hmm
stuff she had, like what was the one about the balls?
yeah. I remember all
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And it got in movies. Like it was in Boomerang, and there was a scene about the pool balls, and it's like, well, you hit.
yeah,
Yeah, you hit all the
yeah.
white ball hits all the colored balls in, and then the
Balls,
last
yeah,
ball it hits in is the black ball. And basically, this whole thing is just because white folks are jealous. And they really don't have no
yeah.
melanin, and that stuff is still with us
Well,
today. Even
oh
though they
yeah,
don't,
it's still with
even though
us.
people don't even know about that book, they still saying stuff like that, right? Um, so a lot of it was just I was tired of hearing that stuff as I had grown out of those things. I was just like, yo, we don't. Because my main issue was it's not that I wanted to be the hall monitor that's telling everybody what the right thing is. It was just the
Right.
way you frame and understand an issue really does guide how you organize around something. So if you think the problem is that white people or formerly albinos, and this whole structure of white supremacy and capitalism is constructed because there are jealous albinos that have taken it out on the world for the last 500 years, that's going to lead to a lot of confused organizing. It's just
Absolutely.
so,
Absolutely.
so it's just like
If you organize at all.
yeah. So, or
Yeah,
just organizing, or just like confused analysis that it can even motivate any kind of organizing, right? So,
that's
if
right.
you think the problems are, man, they just, it's not that white folks aren't jealous at times. I'm not suggesting that, but if you think that's the primary thing driving
Right.
slavery,
Driving.
you know, it's like,
Yeah,
and Jim
yeah,
Crow and mass incarceration and all that is just jealousy and envy because of some unconscious, thing that's stuck in their brain because of some Iceman theory or something like that.
yeah.
That really does distort how a lot of black people understand an issue, and how we actually, do anything about it if we choose to try to do anything. So I was seeing that around me where that was the, not I'm using her as a point of reference, but there's other
Right,
myths.
right.
But I'm saying
Oh, there's.
they're
I mean, you
based in
just
a,
mentioned one, the Iceman inheritance.
yeah,
It's a
yeah,
whole series of that,
yeah.
and in fact, what was it? The something colors that Tahid
Hidden
Nasheed
colors,
did. There's like,
hidden,
yeah,
hidden
yeah,
colors,
hidden
yeah,
colors is that, and that gets us to the foundational Black Americans. But
yeah.
I don't want to go there yet. I want to come back because the question is, it's easy for us to not just debunk, but to develop an attitude that looks down on
Exactly. Yeah.
people who hold these beliefs. And for me, the more important thing is, how do we understand, why do our people gravitate to these types of, I guess we could call them black conspiracy theories. We know white folks do the same thing, but so the question is, why do you guys think that this stuff continues to percolate and always attracts a much broader audience than we radicals have been able to attract?
I mean, I think on one hand, for one, often, especially when we first started the show, a lot of those myths we always open with, we used to believe this, just a kind of level set that we're not above anybody. Like, we used to
Right.
believe this actually, or some version of this, because we didn't know any better, or something of that case, because you don't know if you what you don't know. Um, but I think the reason a lot of those things are attractive is that they're just simple explanations. I mean, and simple explanations just don't require a lot of work. Like, and there's an antagonism. So when somebody's able to explain it or put some kind of context to it, you're like, oh, that's it, right? Like, that's often
Right.
how
Right.
human beings are, period. And it's not a that black people have some extra proclivity to confusion, like we're all vulnerable to that, right? So I
Hmm.
remember when we did an episode early on, it was a former co-host, they're not even on the show anymore, but they had said that they because we were kind of bashing that Francois Welsing book a little too hard, and they kind of pushed back like, well, they're like, if you have a book that explains that, basically white folks are jealous, and that's why they doing all this to you on an interpersonal level, that makes sense, right? Like, if you don't know what all this other stuff, it's like, and it's not that she's totally off, that white
Yeah, no,
folks
there
are,
always has to be some grain of truth.
yeah,
Otherwise, it would never attract people to it.
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's something there. It's just, I don't think that's the root, but it's like there's something there. So that's the thing. What I always say is, you got to decouple things. Like, things get packaged together. So usually inside of myth is a real antagonism
That's
that's
right.
drawn people to it. But then there's all this other stuff wrapped around it, right? And that's how you get caught up in it, right? So even with I know I'm not trying to get on the ADOS thing, but I'm saying part of why that can attract people is because they might see a company hire, an immigrant over them or
Oh,
something,
absolutely.
right? They do see if you go to a college campus, and they'll tell you, this used to be the Black Cultural Center, now it's the Multicultural Center, right? Like, that
Right.
happened at my college, or
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
do see people latching themselves on, and not really showing respect to Black culture, particularly like in the American context, right? And they don't know nothing
Yeah.
about on New Africans or anything like that. So they are attracted to, that. specific thing, right? So I like it's coupled with these other things that are very much speaking to your material reality. And I think that's why myths draw people in. I just always say that the truth is always much more interesting once you actually do the
Hmm.
research. The truth is always much more interesting. And oftentimes, I think even more, even darker sometimes, and even the people that try to come up with these metaphysical ideas. It's like actually when you learn more about what happened, it's like, oh, that was I didn't know it was that intricate, right? So I think those that's part of what drew us to it was just trying to give people better frameworks to understand the things that they face. And today it's no different. I mean, we've expanded to different topics, and I think we would have ever thought we would have gotten to back 5 years ago. It's not maybe as on the
Mm.
nose as it once was because there's just different things to touch on. But I do think that now sometimes people will hit me up and they'll say, well, y'all need to do a show on this, y'all need to do a show on that. And something I always say to people, we're not doing shows for your cousin who's lost themselves down a rabbit hole so much. We're there once they try to climb out and they're kind of like on the fence. That's where
Right,
our show is
right.
going to be most impactful. If your cousin is all the way down, whatever the
Yeah,
rabbit
yeah.
hole is, that's a lot deeper than whatever our show is going to do. But the moment that they're kind of stuck or they're thinking about trying to just even if it's subconsciously trying to dig their way out, that's where our show might help you. But if you're all the way 10 toes down on whatever, it's not even about facts at that point. It's something, there's something more going on with the individual.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And you can't get them out by just telling them they're wrong. That's not going to work.
No, no.
Yeah.
That's going to send them there. Do you think that there are structural factors that create moments when these types of conspiracy theories, these myths, um, have greater power to attract?
So make sure I understand. You saying
Like,
you
so for example, one of the things we know is that in depressions, you're going to get more people using drugs. You're also going to get more people joining churches. You get more
Mhm,
alcoholics.
mhm.
Um, and I'm wondering if these myths are also sensitive, or I should say, people who hold these myths also are impacted by their material conditions, and that when those conditions begin to look hopeless, then people gravitate for things that are outrageous to explain their reality.
Yeah, Fanon kind of talks about that in Wretched, right? About
Yeah.
the people using Bigfoot or something to explain their colonial position as
Mhm.
opposed to confronting the colonizer directly. So I do think that yeah, these things complement misery, like
Yeah.
they genuinely do. And again, even using the Francis Cress Welsing or some of these other kind of theories that they do give you a sense of a self-esteem, right? Like because they're
Mm-hmm.
telling you that because you
Mm-hmm.
have melanin that you're better than somebody else, right? Or they're telling you that
That's right.
you actually have more power, like I'm saying like biologically, because you have melanin and you actually are we talk about recessive genes and dominant genes and stuff.
You see.
You have the dominant gene. So if you're dealing with some kind of like depression or you're not having a good time in life, and somebody comes around and tells you, you got the dominant gene and you're the original people and all of that kind of stuff. And again, it's not that there aren't half truths to this, but they tell you that so it boosts you up. But like we said before, like that also has an inverse effect where it's like, okay, because you have this dominant gene, this is exactly why they'll tell you why you don't feel pain when you go to the doctor.
That's
you know,
right.
this is exactly
There's
why.
always the contradiction.
Yeah. This is why they tell black women, they're not experiencing what they're experiencing when they're about to have a baby or something. Like this is why they might
Right.
even die, in some cases.
Absolutely.
So it that so even though it feels superior, it's like it still plays out on the other side of it. But I get why that's appealing because it's like, you know, you come in. I mean, even that's why I say even though I went through the phase, because it's like it was dope to hear somebody say black men is God. Like I ain't never heard nothing
Mm-hmm.
like that. So it's like, oh, I'm a god like that. That gives you a boost versus you're just some sinner or something. Like it just
No,
feels different.
and look, when the nation said white people are devils, when you look at your treatment with what we say,
Exactly.
it's devilish. It's
Yeah.
been devilish.
Exactly.
So it's attractive. So look, let me ask you this, man. Are there three myths that you consider the most dangerous at this moment that we need to really work harder to debunk?
And it's hard to narrow it down to three. I'm
Okay.
gonna just say what comes to my head. They may not be the most because I'd have to actually really meditate on that question, honestly. I think I think it's weird with myths because often when we're developing them, what we have to do usually is listen to like how people are talking about something, how they understand it, and then see
Mm-hmm.
where and kind of have to do like a kind of dialectical analysis about what's the kind of the primary thing driving why people think about something. So black capitalism, I think, is one, but I don't think it's
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's nuanced in how it plays out because for different people, particularly class wise, it means different things. Right. So it's not, I think sometimes when we criticize it, is we're thinking about it just from the standpoint of the ultra black capitalist, but for a community that gets to buy black or something that feels empowering, but it leads to a lot of, I think, energy that could be used elsewhere. So I would say that's one. Um, hmm, I think I said original people earlier. I don't know if I'd say that's the myth, but I think there's something about this kind of
When you say original people, are you talking about like Jobs to Cradle theory, the Iceman and the Sun people?
some of that, yeah. Just but there's different groups have percolated that theory in different ways that we're the original people. It's not that there's not truth in that. It's just
Right.
it's a bit ahistorical in the sense that you're assuming that race has this like trans historical aspect to it that has always been static, and so that black people as we exist today were original in way centuries or
Right.
even millennia ago, and that's not how human history is actually developed. So that kind of, so as long as I don't know if it's original people, like I don't even know if we do a myth on that, but there's something to this like idea of, I get we're trying to recuperate history, but there's a way when we kind of overdo that we flatten a lot of history. you know
Yeah, let me pose this for you as a dilemma that I'm trying to wrestle with. Like, I don't believe in the notion of race.
Right.
Right. I mean, I think that's utter bullshit. Right. Complete and utter bullshit. Homo sapiens sapien is quote unquote one species, one race. But I do believe that Neanderthals and Dionysians were a different branch of humanity. They
Hmm.
were humans, but they weren't us, right? And that raises the question that since Africans and people of African descent don't have Neanderthal DNA, any Europeans, I've seen some people, they used to say 4 to 7, and then they started saying 1 to 4. I'm like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Y'all rehabilitated the Neanderthals once you found out that Europeans had DNA from them still. But
Hmm.
someone once said to me that the whole Nation of Islam thing was rooted in there were the Neanderthals who who interbred with with Europeans, who was us before they went to Europe, right? And
Yeah,
that
yeah,
therefore means that they have a violent gene that we don't have. Now, I don't know all the DNA, but that's one theory that's out there that does seem to be rooted in quote unquote scientific DNA, but it So how would you react to that stuff? That the
Yeah, I
fact that
don't.
Europeans do have Neanderthal DNA means that they have something that's human but not Homo sapien sapien.
I am not a scientist, so I'm not going to try to speak on it on a molecular level. I guess we did have an episode on DNA test and how that's all BS as well, and how that's not based on anything. So people can check that out. And we did talk to a biological scientist um, to check that out. But I don't. Again, I think those theories. I think they, even based on what you said, I think a lot of they cherry pick stuff. Like, so they'll find a study that suggests something mildly, and then they'll like crank it up, and next thing you know, that explains everything. That's why they act this way. Uh, and for me, I don't particularly care why Europeans act the way they do. I don't actually care. Like, I
Mm.
just want to defeat it. Like, I don't need an
Yeah.
explanation really. So for me, it's kind of futile to even getting into that discussion because I don't really know. Like, okay, let's say it's true. Now what? You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? So,
See, that's why I think that all this DNA stuff, I understand the medical usage, right? But I think that ultimately the DNA stuff runs us to the theories that white folks have propagated that we can only call racist. I
yeah,
don't know how you avoid it. So when you start emphasizing the DNA as opposed to socialization and
yeah,
culture,
yeah,
I think that you are down a rabbit hole that will lead you into some horrible shit.
yeah. You're on a eugenics path, honestly.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's
so
what
yeah,
that's where you
yeah,
are.
yeah,
You're walking that path. Actually, you're
yeah,
running that damn
yeah.
highway.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I don't even. I just kind of turn off when people get into it because I'm like, I don't know. All right, what do you want me to do with that? Because I'm like, all right, so white folks act this way because they came from a cold environment or something, and that's why they are violent because they ain't had no resources or whatever, right? There's probably something. Again, if you're going to analyze material conditions, then climate
Right.
and what food they have available or not is part of the analysis, right? But to use that to explain everything when then we also know there are darker melanated people from those areas who do not behave that way as well, so that doesn't
Yeah.
always that doesn't always hold up. And then we did an episode on melanin, and another thing is people think part of why race doesn't hold up because they think everything evolved a certain kind of way. So like skin tone didn't even evolve in the same. It evolved in a different
Right.
direction than like people's noses or the way their eyes are
Yeah.
shaped. So the entire like phenotypes of people did not like
Right.
evolve
Right.
in this kind of like mono directional like one path forward. Like it didn't evolve that way.
Right.
So even when we're
Right.
talking about melanin and stuff, now there are differences. Like obviously vitamin D and stuff like that. That is a real thing. When you are darker, you live in a colder climate, you're not going to take in as much
Right.
vitamin D,
Right.
or we're talking about sunburns or stuff like that. But these are things people cherry pick, and people love to cherry pick science. And I think, and this is something I think that if we're doing what white folks do, like they use science to try to justify theft, or to justify,
Yeah.
colonization or slavery or whatever. So I don't really like to get into that conversation with folks. I'm like, again, what are you going, how are you going to defeat them? Because it also feels very defeatist because it's kind of
Hmm.
like that's just the way they are. And so we just can't do nothing about it, so we don't actually have to organize, or we don't have to actually do anything because they can't change. They're all devils, whatever.
Well,
And
genocide becomes the answer. If you take that position, the logic of it is either you do nothing, hoping that a supernatural force would change your material conditions, or you say we got to kill
yeah, yeah.
them. Yeah.
And
So
usually we don't, I'm not suggesting we go there, but usually we don't even get to know to that kind of logic. We're more like it usually brings about very conservative solutions, you know. So you either get these very conservative solutions or you get like a Israeli option. So
Yeah, I mean,
it's like, yeah,
you get it leads to cynicism.
yeah, exactly.
You don't care. So let's abandon that topic, and I want to come to. I'm working my way to your book, which I think is fascinating, but not just fascinating. I think it's some damn good analysis. Um,
Thank you.
but so if say we go 1970, Earl of Forry's classic, The Myth of Black Capitalism, and Jared Ball's recent book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, Media, Race, Economics. They do a superb job of punctuating the economic foundation upon which the myth rests. But I suspect that at this moment, based on the students that I've taught, particularly black males, that the myth of capitalism they don't see as a myth. They see it as the basis upon which they will quote unquote this this perpetual phrase that they use now. It's their pathway to generational wealth.
Yeah, yeah.
Generational wealth will solve all of black folks' problems. So, what can we do to more fully expose the fallacies of black capitalism that little capital will be eaten by big capital?
I
Because it's
mean,
monopoly capitalism.
well, you kind
White
of answer,
capital is
yeah,
big.
you're kind of answering it because one is most black capitalists I always say this don't actually explain capitalism. Like they don't really have much of an analysis for capitalism, and I'm not even asking them to be critical of
That's
it.
true.
Yeah, just explain how it actually functions. Like explain what private property is, explain markets, explain profits. You know, because when we talk about Marx or something, what Marx did do is he studied capitalism, and most of Marx's work is actually explaining capitalism. Like
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
critique of it, but it's a deep analysis of capitalism. So first, you need to explain capitalism to even explain how you're going to get generational wealth or anything else because again what is capitalism, and then another thing they don't do is since they don't explain capitalism is they rarely talk about the actual conditions of their workers or anything of that nature. So I rarely hear what is the wage that we will make under your black business, what are the
mm-hmm,
benefits we will receive under your black business. Notice I'm not even
mm-hmm.
speaking about like communism and socialism. I'm just saying just
No, right.
explain.
You
Yeah,
gonna pay me a living wage?
yeah,
Are you
just
gonna pay me more than Costco's?
yeah. Because I'm like, if I can go to Walmart and make $12 an hour, you know, or whatever they pay, and $10, whatever you at, and you're gonna pay the same, you know, and Walmart might be able to get me a few more benefits, then why am I working for you? You know, just because I get to work for black people? Because my material conditions don't really change. So I'm just saying before I even get into like the deeper
Mhm.
mechanisms of capital with these people, I'm always just like, y'all got to explain the basics of capitalism. You know, like first, that's always my thing, and then we can get to the deeper myths because I wrote a piece about it. I mean, I've written a lot about that, but I wrote a piece last year on I don't know why my camera is not focusing. I don't know what's going on. It'll fix itself, I guess.
Might clean it.
Yeah, hold on. There we go. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. But yeah, I wrote a piece about this, and I took on primarily black buying power and the circulating black dollar, which I think is actually in some ways
That's
worse than
really
black
crazy.
buying power. Yeah.
It is. That's the
So
dumbest shit ever.
yes. And I related it to tariffs because since that was like back when that was the big thing in the news because of Trump and everything. So people were
Yeah.
finally thinking about trade and where things came from and stuff like that.
It's
Um,
on the Hood Communist website.
yeah, it was on grassroots thinking too. The
Okay.
grassroots thinking, kids corner. I call it kids corner economics because that's what
Yes.
it is. You know, it's like you're talking about things, and which this is what frustrates me with a lot of these things is like we don't treat black people as I always say black people deserve rigor, and we don't give black people rigor when we try to come up with these poor explanations to our conditions. So with I think most people are familiar with black buying power, so I'm not going to go too deep into that one. But with the circulation of black dollar, you always hear stuff like we got to keep the dollar in our community. We gotta have our and again, it's playing on real sentiment of like ownership and sovereignty and self determination. It plays on that sentiment, but one, they'll say stuff like the dollar circulates 29 times in the white community and or Asian community and 20 sometimes, and the number always changes. It's never the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's that
Because I'm always amazed at how they are able to calculate that, right?
you
How
can't
do you know that?
because it doesn't make any sense. One for one,
Yeah.
you make money by dollars leaving the community. Even a rich community makes money because the dollars is circulating around the world and then things come back to you. And it's just very simple. If your dollar only stayed in your community, like you wouldn't be able to purchase any goods that you can bring into your community. So when you go to Walmart, they don't they don't grow chickens behind Walmart. You know what I'm saying? they don't they don't grow
They know.
they don't grow green beans behind Walmart. That has to be imported. So your dollar is always leaving your community to bring in whatever you need, unless you live on some kind of compound where everything you need is internal to your little commune.
Yeah,
The
well,
money gotta
there
leave
are no
the
such places, bro.
no. So
You,
we live in a world of trade, and when you look up where stuff comes from, it's coming from it comes from Mexico, it comes from India, it comes from Brazil. Like depending on what you're buying, it comes from China. Like, it doesn't just come from here. You have to import and you export. That's how any economy works. Even under socialism, it would still be a thing where you got to trade,
yeah,
like you got to bring things in and you got to send things out so you can do whatever the business of doing things is. So I was making a case that black capitalism, it has a form of like the way Marx talks about alienation. It
hmm
alienates people from the actual productive process. Black capitalism doesn't actually explain how the world functions.
no,
So like it doesn't explain how things get to your community and how they leave. And that particular circulating dollar myth doesn't even make any economic sense because everybody's dollar leaves their community almost immediately because that's the only way they get stuff into their community. They're paying a service to a store, no matter how wealthy that particular community is. They pay a service to a store that then imports things. If you order off of Amazon, Amazon don't have all that stuff in a factory somewhere down the street. There's semis. I used to work at Amazon. They come in and they bring all these products that come from, and there's pieces from everywhere else that have been refined. So it just alienates you from how the world actually functions. Talking about keeping a dollar in the community by shopping somewhere, even if you shop at the black store, it don't stay
right,
in the community. So if I go to your t-shirt shop, did you make your t-shirts there? Did you pick cotton in the back? You know what I'm saying?
right, right.
Like it
You
doesn't
know,
doesn't
and
make
then
any
they compound it by comparing income to national
GDP.
product,
Yeah,
right? This shit can't be gross national product. It's
yeah,
income. You
yeah,
gotta pay. You gotta pay. You, you got debts that gotta come out of that. So yeah, it is one of the dumbest things that has circulated in our community, but it has indeed found a base. And
yeah,
what's interesting to me, and I mean, as a Marxist, it's exactly what I would expect, that base moves ever perceptively to the right.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
Right?
because that what I noticed again, I was talking about this a little earlier, but like there's something in Indianapolis, and I don't mean this to talk bad about. I'm it's just what it is. But like, there's an event. It started called the Black Business Block Party, and now the person that hosted does multiple events throughout the year. But to his credit, it is not like some he doesn't like pick the bougiest black people. Like, he goes to the hood with all these events. And that's the thing I think we miss sometimes.
Mm,
This is not just some petty bourgeois like aspiration. It's that, but it's also like this stuff is like he has this stuff like, I mean, and I don't mean just kind of the hood. Like, he goes to the, areas where there might have just been a shooting yesterday, and
mm,
now we're gonna show up, and it's positive, right? Like, you show up, you got a bunch of vendors who have very small businesses. You get to patronize them. There's like my godson just performed at one. That's why I was at the last one. You get kids get to perform. People get to see folks they haven't seen in a while. It kind of feels like a black family reunion or something. So there's a way that this stuff is brought into our community through very community based things, right?
right, right.
It's like it's not, but it's conservative because now everybody thinks that it's just because everybody thinks they need to have a business now, right? Like, that's what a kid
Yeah,
learns by
yeah,
going to that, is I'm going to have a business, and that's how. But they think they're going to save their community by having a business.
right.
It's not that they're all selfish thieves. Some of them are, but a
Yeah,
lot of these people are told that this is a way to actually empower black people, is by
absolutely.
having this business that has no employees, and like,
That's
because
the that's
yeah.
actually the danger of it, is that people are doing it with good intentions,
Mhm.
and that they believe that this is the only way to transform our communities for the better.
Yeah, and
So I
that's
want to
what.
go
Go ahead, go ahead.
do a deep dive on your book. You and Rasul Mowat. I knew Rasul when he was at the University of Illinois. Um, so the book, Laundering Black Rage, The Washing of Black Death, People, Property, and Profits, came out in 2024. And I want to first try and situate it in terms of its genealogy. To what extent, Black Rage, are you referencing, responding to the 1968 William Greer and Price Cobb's Black Rage? And to what extent are you responding to Ellis Coase's, or influenced by Ellis Coase's Rage of a Privileged Class? Now, I know the analysis, you guys are making a Marxist or at least a socialist analysis, and neither of them do. But were those kind of things that were in your headlights that you were riffing off of, responding to in any way?
Yeah, I read through those, particularly the Greer text. I didn't find, to be honest with you, I didn't find them to be very relevant to what we were trying to say, because I felt like they were kind of psychological, and we were not looking to turn
Yeah,
rage into. And there's even the can't remember the protest psychosis stuff, and
yeah, yeah,
and they
yeah.
talked about black men were you know schizophrenic. They were rageful because they were listening to Malcolm X speeches and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah,
we
there's a
didn't.
conservative. But I
Yeah,
thought y'all might have been countering some of that.
yeah, I would, in the sense we were countering. Yeah, because I mean, you've written book proposals before, so you have to explain what you're doing and what you're not doing, and the
Yeah,
not doing part was something. So, like,
yeah,
I appreciate
yeah,
the exercise, but yeah, so in the not doing, it was very clear, like, this is not a psychological study. This is not about why, I'm not, there's research to be done on it, but this is not about like why people like go off on folks in their homes or why they commit crimes. This is not trying to, because I felt like that Black Rage book by Greer and them was more like, was kind of some of the books we've seen even after 2020, where you're trying to explain stuff to white people, like, why are black people like
yeah.
this? This is why they're like this, because and so you might have some truths in there about because they live in poverty or they whatever, but it's very much like this is to explain black people to black America, and we have no interest in that kind of in that kind of analysis. It was more thinking about rage as a verb, and thinking about rage as something that people organize around, and even thinking about it in some ways as a form of labor, and how do you quell that labor? How do you convert it? How do you commodify it into something that is that complements capital as opposed to threatens it? Right. That was the basis of our
Mhm.
study, not this like kind of why are black people mad, or even there were some good books, I think, or a good one, Bell Hooks, Killing Rage was another one.
Mhm.
That one I thought was decent, particularly the beginning, and we definitely pulled from some of that. But my thing was with that book, not a criticism, more so like we were trying to build on it. Like we're also not trying to legitimize rage, because for us it just is legitimate. Her book, she kind of fights to legitimize rage as like
Right, right.
that can be a positive thing. We're not trying to also legitimize it as a positive thing or a negative. We recognize it as a consequence of oppression. If you do what you do to people,
That's right.
obviously they're going to be rage, and it's going to pop up in some ways that are more radical, in some ways that aren't. But how is that history played out is more our question. So Bell Hooks, I feel like, just solidifies it as because there's a part in there where she criticizes Cornel West, how he talked about Malcolm X and his rage. And she's like, well, Malcolm X's rage had a positive force, and people would tend to think of rage just as this negative reactionary thing, and it's
Mhm.
not that. So I just said, yeah, I agree, but I'm not going to waste a chapter trying to like argue for
Trying
it
to
to be legit.
rationalize it, right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
She did
we
that.
move on.
We
Yeah,
give
she
her
did
her
that.
credit. She did that. We don't
Yeah,
need to do it. You
yeah.
also don't, one of the things about, you familiar with Carol Anderson's book, White Rage?
Hmm.
It was all the rage amongst white folk. And I love Carol, but it was. But she also tries to make the distinction between violence and rage, but she argues that white rage was policy. It became policy. And certainly she's on to something. As you guys conceptualize black rage, I get that it's a commodity, but is there a tighter explanation of what it is before you get to what's where it comes from and what's done to it?
In
What's
terms
its
of
use value?
its use value is in the sense that for us, it's trying to think about dialectically. So on one side, you have conquest of people, you have and everything that comes with that. So in doing that, inevitably, people will respond to that, right? Like that's the
Hmm.
basis of what it comes from. Is that it's not a just a feeling that fell out of the sky. It's you stole my land, you stole my people, you've
You
done those
killed
things.
my yeah.
Yeah, you killed my brother, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a legitimate response to that. Now, how well it's organized is always contested in history. So that's why we're like, it's not inherently revolutionary. It's not inherently reactionary. It's really a contested about how well it. So it has a revolutionary force inside it, but it can really go either way. But at its
Right.
basis, is it grows out of that. It grows out of what
It's
is
a
phenomenal.
justifiable response
Right, right,
to the situation. Yeah, yeah.
right. So it's produced by that. And then so there's a way that white capital tries to corral it, throughout history. So we try to look more back in history as opposed to today to try to understand today. Like, okay, 2020, all this money pops up,
Mhm.
Juneteenth is a holiday, what's going on, George Floyd. And it's like, so we're noticing George Floyd gets killed by the police. There's rage in response to that. And it's not just black rage, but black rage inspires the rage of others.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
and then it happens. But looking at George Floyd, it's like this is a poor black man with substance abuse issues, unemployed. So that's who gets killed by the police more than anyone else is that particular demographic. It's not just black people as a whole. It's not. There's a
That's
class
right.
element.
That's
There's
right.
an ability
That's
element,
right.
right? So
There's a class
so
and
how does
gender
it?
element. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does it go from that to a corporate board seat or so, a DEI class or whatever, like, and it does it seemingly without any notice, like no one even notices it. It's like, how do we even get here? So that was the original question, like, how did we get here? Like, this doesn't even make any sense. This has nothing to do really with that specific problem. So our thing was always like, black rage comes from material conditions, and then therefore you need to address those material conditions. And if you're not dealing with material conditions, that's how it's more easily laundered, because the laundering takes it away from the material conditions, and
Yeah.
now we're just talking about feelings or vibes or something else, right? Like, so in the Carol Anderson book, it was funny, we were on a panel um at some, I think it was in Wisconsin, and we were presenting on the book, and somebody went up there and he ranted about white rage. And our thing was like, if we're being materialists, we're like, white rage is laundered too.
Mhm.
Like, we're being materialists. I'm saying, if you're talking about working class, poor white people, that rage is laundered too. So that rage there's a whole other book to be written on that, how that rage is converted over to pointed at the policies that punish.
That's right.
So there's not like, so white rage isn't just some inherent thing. It's like that's produced
That's
just
right.
like just like everything else. Like, that is a produced thing. So that doesn't so we kind of disagreed. It was funny because he ran on a whole monologue about this, and then we had to
Because he
kind of be
saw it
like,
in just race terms, and you saw it in both race and class terms.
yeah, yeah, we had to look at it materially, not just and even Bell Hooks makes that point. She talks about narcissistic rage and militant rage.
Yes. Yes.
And that for me really, so I was like, that's house Negro, field Negro, kind of, you can almost marry
Hmm.
it. So that's, that, so the narcissistic rage is often what is promoted. And her point, I was just rereading this the other day for something else, and she's like, that kind of rage is what makes it easy to dismiss racism,
Yeah.
because it's coming from a very narcissistic, individualistic perspective. So it's easier for the right to then come in and attack quote unquote wokeness when it's couched in this very
That's
narcissistic
right.
rage. It's about recognition and representation. It's an easier target than when it's about lead in your water or housing, or
Hmm.
school. Like, it's just an easier target, right? For them to be like these snowflake liberals, when it's about, like, just being able to read books of this author or that author. So it actually, she really makes that point, why when you turn it into that narcissistic way, it's easier to take it out, you know. And that's what we're
Absolutely.
trying to show in the book.
So let me ask you this, and then we're going to try and get to Q&A. But one of the things that really resonated with me was the internal colonial thesis, and that you use that to help frame the
Mhm.
argument. And I can you explain why you decided that that was the most powerful framework to use? I even saw the way in which you structured the metaphors: black rage, laundering, labor, commodity, fronts of recapture, home front, that fell within the internal colonial thesis. So
Yeah, so how why did I use that? Is that what you're asking?
yeah,
Just make
yeah.
sure I
Why
understand.
did you conclude that that was the best framework to make this argument?
Well, one, I was always trying to connect the diaspora, so I feel like internal colonialism does a good job of, you can talk about what's happening inside these borders and also go across the world and talk about what's happening, and still maintain a level of continuity, while also recognizing the distinctions and differences that people deal with in their own material situation. Like, so you're not You're not extracting it and saying it's exactly how it is in Africa or exactly how it is in Jamaica.
That's right. You're not trying to import and export
No, no.
revolution.
But you
Yeah.
can show the connections. I think that allows you to show those connections much easier when you use internal colonialism, even in internal neocolonialism, like Robert Allen uses.
Hmm.
Because you can show, and I think Rasul's contributions was important when we study cities, because cities is one of the best ways you can really, even because even that's really how that theory is developed at its best, is looking at how cities are structured,
That's right. That's
and
right.
where do we actually live? Who works in, what is the divisions of labor, right? And then when we get to the era of like black mayors, and we called them the overseers of austerity. So it's no coincidence that when black mayors start getting in office, they're often the ones that are doing a lot of the so-called neoliberalism. An
Yeah.
argument that we made, and I think comes out of even thinking about neocolonialism, was that neocolonialism in kind of in academia, like neoliberalism becomes like the shift. But my
Yeah.
thing was, you don't get neoliberalism without neocolonialism, because you can't implement those kind of policies without
That's right.
neo-colonial
That's
leaders in
right.
place. So either
That's
you've
right.
assassinated the real ones, or you've put the puppets in there, and now
Yeah.
you can steal property, whether it's here in the United States within a city that sells away its parking lots or other public
Hmm.
utilities, or in Africa where you sell away all your, some structural adjustment program where you're selling away all your public land or something, and now these corporations own it. You need some kind of politician and leaders in place that are willing to give it away, and that because they look like the people that voted for them, they're like, I guess that makes sense, or they're okay with it on some level. That's how you actually pass it through. So you need a colonial structure to even
Hmm.
implement neoliberalism,
Yeah.
and I
No,
think
no,
that's,
absolutely.
yeah. And I think that's missed often when people talk about neoliberalism. Because for me, it's neoliberalism is just the economics of neocolonialism, right? Like it's just, you don't can't really have one without the other, especially post like Keynesian kind of economics or whatever.
See, and I think that's the key to understanding the difference between Reagan and Trump, right? In that Reagan wanted to curtail black political power, but he understood that you had to have these junior partners managing the cities.
Hmm.
The Trumpist fascists, they actually want to get rid of neoliberalism. They want to go
Hmm.
to something that's even more authoritarian, and that's their attack on black politicians, the black vote. All of that is that they want to return to old direct
Hmm.
colonialism. They don't want
Hmm.
neocolonial. They don't want no
Yeah.
powerful black people in these junior partner roles. They want straight up white supremacy, what do you say, unlaundered, just straight up.
Right. Right.
So, so my last, and this is somewhat of a slight critique. What
Hmm.
I felt reading the book is that you're talking about primitive accumulation recurring,
Hmm.
but you don't say that.
It's in there. I didn't say it's not in there often, but it's in chapter one. I know the paragraph it's in.
Really? Okay, I
Yeah.
missed it. Damn.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
in it's
I stand
it's
corrected, my brother.
it because yeah, because it's definitely an ode to that. I admit we probably could have said it more often, but no, it's in there. I think I don't know the page number exactly, but I
Okay,
know
okay.
around where it's at. It's in the Conquest Capital section in chapter one, somewhere in there.
I
Um,
will reread because that was the only thing that kind of threw me. I said they consciously are talking about the recurrence of primitive accumulation, and I felt that it's important because we got these goddamn white Marxists that you can't tell them anything, and they
mhm.
don't understand that primitive accumulation recurs. That's what capital does. Moves from developed areas to underdeveloped areas, right?
Yeah,
So it
yeah,
can exploit.
yeah. I mean, that's effectively because there's a whole piece on there's a whole piece to be made, and I remember thinking about I could have probably, but I wanted to ground it in Black African people, but it was I could have just made an argument about capitalism as laundering and really never even got to rage or whatever because that was really originally I was just like this is just laundering really no matter what we're looking at. So rage is just one of the things that's laundering is. So yeah, you have to conquer, set up fronts, reconquer, now. But once you get your front set up, it almost happens without even anyone noticing because you capture, you
That's
funnel it
right.
through, so you take dirty and clean. So like when we say, yeah, like that the Africans were the dirty money and the cotton is the clean. Like that's not a metaphor.
Hmm.
It's like that's really what
Yeah,
happens, right? So, but
yeah.
that's always happening, and you're right. The primitive accumulation, I think is a fair critique that maybe we could have underlined it more, but it is like mentioned, kind of like deep in the text or whatever. And there's even there's a reference in there. I can't remember the author about like state making and war, and how war, like that's how we were referencing like the colonial companies,
Hmm.
like the Dutch East Indian or the British
Right.
East Indian, and how those are some of the earliest forms of primitive accumulation.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Those are
yeah,
the. I mean, the whole point about Marx making the argument that the origin of capital is in the what Walter Rodney would call the internationalization of European interests. It's
mm,
in the attunement of the indigenous people in the Americas in the mines. It's in the turning of Africa into a warren for the hunting of black skin. It's in the forcing of opium on the trade of the East Indies that what Oliver Cox was talking about, the international aspect of it, is absolutely critical. But that's where the primitive accumulation at its in its worst ways come through. It's not just turning European peasants into proletarians. It's not just taking the land from the peasants. It's also this international aspect.
it's imperialism. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
I mean, yeah, yeah. And we talked about and the thought slipping my mind, but we talk about, Walter Rodney talks about, you were talking about Rodney, but he talks about like the sugar from the Caribbean and the cocoa from West Africa becomes a chocolate industry in Europe and
hmm.
North America, right? Like that's so, because for us, I didn't want laundering just be some kind of abstract. I'm like, no, you can see it. Like, Rasul putting it cities even makes it more concrete. Like if you're
Yeah,
watching semis go up and down the street, you're watching laundering. It's like because they're moving product from one place to another. Like you're
yeah,
watching it go up and down the
yeah,
street. It's
yeah.
not it's not the rage was just one was we were kind of combining two different theories, like laundering and the black rage was okay, here's our thesis on black rage, here's our thesis on laundering. How does so when you insert black rage into a system of laundering, what happens, right? How does that look like historically? But they're really like two kind of distinct different theories, and you could really apply it. We say, I think in chapter 4, you can, when we talk about like other types of rage, like in India or even in Ireland, you can look at those
Hmm.
situations. You have to do the research to plug it in, but you could plug it in and see how their rage is laundered, which has a different
Oh,
historical,
absolutely.
different historical character to it. But I'm saying you can still see it. But to act like, yeah, primitive accumulation, especially at the beginning, you don't set up a front without committing the crime, you know. So, like that's just how it works.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, man. So I love the work.
Thank
I'm
you.
looking through here for questions, and as is typical, what we get is more comments than questions. But everything is
I
positive.
see I see this one. I'm just gonna
Okay.
start.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take that one. It's from Josh. So, can you explain why you think his work is so essential to our struggle, and what parts of it remain unfinished in terms of the Allen thesis of the turn to neocolonialism?
Yeah, I mean, one, I think that book is timeless. I think it's still, when you read it, it's still whole. That was the first book for the record, that's the first book when I was thinking through this theory, that was the first book I went and read. I was like,
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
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 Like I was like, let me go. And I had read it before, but not, it's different when you're reading something to develop an idea versus just reading it. So I went and
Right.
reread that from front to back. Um, so I think, I guess we could keep the question on here, but I think, so for one, I think what he does, he's is so important because he's writing about really the transition to the neocolonialism aspect. He's right there. What was that, 69 that he's writing
Yeah,
that
it's
book, 68,
69.
69?
Yeah.
The book comes out in 69, so probably 68, 67. So he's there to kind of capture that transition. Um, and I think it's one of the best works on internal colonialism. So he's showing you the foundations and their relationship to the state. He's showing you the way that black power is captured by the petty bourgeois and black petty bourgeois, and even how, in some ways, organizers really weren't prepared for that. They kind of caught them off guard that black power was so appealing to that class. Like, I don't think they really were prepared for it. He talks about that. Um, and then, he shows you the different ways that the different factions of capital operate. So he shows all these the black business stuff and all pushing of that is occurring, but he
Mhm.
also shows, like, I think he called it, what was it, corporate fascism or something, like
No, it's called a corporate liberalism.
corporate liberalism. But there was a part in
Yeah.
there he talks about there was like three different types. There was like the kind of Keynesian welfare state. There was the corporate side of it, and then there was just like the straight like fascists. I think those are the three. I don't think
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
getting the
yeah.
names right.
He's got something
Yeah,
repression. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I'd have to look through I remember he called one of the chapters that, but so he's showing you that these kind of different ways that they suppress what I'm calling now like black rage, like through these different approaches. And he shows how the welfare state had kind of fallen apart. It was starting to fall apart at that point. So it created an opening for the more corporate capture that we see today, which up to that point wasn't as dominant. It had been present before, but it wasn't
Hmm.
as dominant. And then he shows you just a more like, boots on the ground approach. But he also talks about how like riot police start learning how to better handle, their subjects. And so it's just a great book because he really just captures a moment that explains so much of what we watching today, right? And then I think
Absolutely.
in terms of what remains unfinished, I've said this on other shows before, but what does it mean to be like multiple generations into neocolonialism? So
Hmm.
all he could do was see the
Hmm.
transition at that time. He didn't. I
That's
mean, he
right.
does later write, I think, a more fleshed out piece on neocolonialism, or
Yeah, he
internal
does.
neocolonialism. But it's like, what does it mean to not have any memory of the explicit colonialism? What does it mean to have generations of people who don't even have any memory of that? How has it continued to perfect itself? Because back then the stuff they were doing was mild, in my opinion, compared to, in terms of the corporate side, compared to what we see today. Um, their ability to capture a black community was not at the same level that it is today. So I feel like there needs to be more study, which is what we try to do. I don't feel like we've completed his work or anything, but what we were trying to do was think about that as well. But I feel like we couldn't get so as much to the present as I wanted because there was just so much history we had to deal with, you know.
Yeah, I think that is the problem that we radicals bear, is that in order to explain the present, we have to do a deep dive in history, and we're the only ones who's going to do it. But in doing so, we often have to truncate the present. I will
Yeah.
say this, I'm just give myself a little advertisement. My task, as I saw it in the book that I'm working on, was to complete the Allen analysis.
Mm,
I think that one of the things that's missing in Allen went after the politics, and the politics come off as overdetermined, and there's
mm,
not enough on the economic transformation in
mm-hmm,
terms of neo-colonial state.
mm-hmm.
That you have to tie those two together.
That's a fair critique, actually. I appreciate that. Yeah, he does deal more with some of the maneuverings of, like you said, the politicians, the foundations, but he doesn't deal so much with the transformation of capital itself.
Particularly
Yeah.
transformation. Well, he doesn't deal with transformation of capital, and he certainly doesn't deal with the transformation of black capital, because in
Mhm,
the sense that not Jared, but Earl Afari wrote, "Black capitalism is a myth." Today, black capitalism is not a myth. What people think they can get from it is mythical, right?
mhm.
But you have black folks who play a very prominent role in this economy. They're very small, but black capitalists will they control now something like 65% of black income.
Mm,
In fact, they have a much more dominant share of black income and wealth than they've ever had. And yet they still remain like 2% of US capital, but their dominance in the black community is greater than we could have ever imagined.
yeah,
And we've got to contend with that, right?
yeah,
So we can't just say it's myth in the sense that Afari meant, not in the sense that you mean
mhm.
that you're going to be able to transform the black community into an oasis through capital,
Nah,
right?
yeah.
So
No, I
look,
think
we
that's
usually
oh, you mind if I
let me
respond?
just say this. Yeah, I want you to respond.
Um,
Usually I try and wrap it up at 8:30, but we're gonna go a little bit longer because I want you to respond. And then I got one more comment that I want you to respond to.
yeah, I think that's a good point. I think even when we think about, like, when we look at like wealth disparity or income disparity, you find that there's a bigger disparity internal
Yes,
among black folks than there is to like the even broader America, right? Like, or United
that's
States.
right.
So that does demonstrate something that I think we're not necessarily looking at, but you know, and even back in those days, even in some of Robert Allen's work, people will complain about the Jews in the community or the Chinese in the community, and that's still a thing. I'm not saying they
Oh yeah.
necessarily left, but there's they've been joined, I guess.
That's a good way to say it.
so, you know, so they've
Yeah,
been
yeah.
they've been joined by some of these businesses, and that's what I was trying to get at earlier on, some about these community things. 'Cause again, often on the internet, the criticism is about the concept of black capitalism, the logic of it, which I think is a good criticism. But when you go to the actual communities, this is not just something that a bunch of bootstrap people are talking about. You have poor black people who attend buy black events, and they are being
Mhm.
indoctrinated with that early on by people who in some ways don't even know any better.
Right,
And these will even have grassroots support, and I've even had to work with them myself because it's part of the community. So I can't just be like, well, shrugs, I don't know these, I'm a radical F y'all. It
right,
don't,
right, right.
like, I still gotta deal with them. So, like, that part I think is understudied. Um, I do think we need to look more at how it has a downward effect. And then to your point, it's not just that you have these little mom and pop kind of things. Like, especially when you get into certain industries like
Oh,
restaurants and
absolutely.
hair and stuff like that, they have a major hold on, what happens. And they also are, they have a sway over the actual neighborhoods. Like, we're talking about
Oh,
local, they
oh
have a
yeah,
sway over
yeah.
the neighborhoods, what gets built somewhere. Like I was talking at the beginning of
Hmm.
this interview about black churches, they've kind of taken that role in some cases, in terms, not taking it, but they've joined the role in terms of, like, they're who you might come to, they're the role models in the community, And then that's not even dealing with the actual like hardcore economics, where to your point, like there is more of a capture of the market than there once was in some ways, and in other ways they're declining. Like they don't. There's less black banks, right?
Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
have less of share of the dollar. So you were talking about the beginning in
But
terms of.
they've grown in tech. There's a lot of powerful black tech companies.
Hmm.
So yeah, but they certainly have declined in terms of finance capital because the moment of neoliberalism, finance capital was dominant, and so it wiped out its competitors.
But they're in tech. They're the emerging dispensaries.
Construction,
Yeah, construction.
yeah.
This
Oh,
this the
distilleries. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Like
yeah.
they're, and that's where even some of these celebrities can get their money in on some of this stuff, right? So like but we don't study it. So that's why I look forward to the book because a good question is what industries are black capitalists in? You know?
Black enterprise.
Yeah.
There are 200 black men. Gives you a real good sense of the sectors that they're in. And I think they still do it yearly.
Mm-hmm.
Top black businesses, and you do get to see the sector. They're more diversified than they ever were,
Mm.
um, and they're better. They have more employees, but they still don't have a significant employee base,
Right.
particularly the ones in tech. And I guess maybe you don't have to in tech. I'm not sure.
If you want to be a big tech company, even with AI, you still need employees because you got a lot of
Okay.
code and you got a lot of marketing. So yeah, you get more. You get, but the thing about that's a whole other conversation. But like tech, because I actually have a little experience working with a black capitalist, and it was a terrible experience. I could talk about
Mm.
another day, but
Okay.
terrible. but but we were trying to start an app. Like this is while back, and I thought I was going to be able to work through a contradiction that I could not work through. It was a long time ago. I did learn a lot about business, but um, terrible experience. But like he was just trying to. His goal was to get bought by the bigger
Yeah,
companies.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's often the black capitalist goal
Hmm.
now
Hmm.
is to simply get up to a level where the monopoly capitalists can buy them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Which I
which
think that's
further,
like that's an understated point, even about like the kind of internal colonial model or even
yeah,
neo-colonialism is like a lot of you even see this with organizations like in the nonprofit world. They start off grassroots and then their hope is that they can get the big foundation money at some point and then they can hire staff and then they make it. And that is very much like kind of how tech works, where you start off, you just throw a
yeah,
bunch of money into it. You're not making anything, you're just burning through money. That's why black folks usually can't compete on the same scale.
right,
You
right.
can't burn through as much money. But you're trying to burn through money, hoping that you can get enough funding from white capital that you can then expand, and hopefully they just buy you out, and you're an app that Google owns or something.
Yes,
Like,
yeah.
that's
That's mainly the
yeah,
goal at
yeah,
this point, which undermines the whole notion of black capitalism.
yeah. I mean, you
Um,
said you see Jay-Z said that he was like, he said in his last interview, he was like, it can't, of course, it can't be 100% black owned. He said if it's 1%, it's black owned. Like he actually admits to this. That the point is to be kind of a leech at the end of the thing, right? Like you want to,
yeah, yeah.
you get your little 5%, but 5% might be $500 million, right? So, like that's how a lot
But
of them work. Yeah,
the crimes that you have to commit, right? Like Jay Z was he 1% of the Brooklyn Nets,
yeah,
and in order to get that 1%, he shut down demonstrations so that they could build that stadium on what used to be
gentrified.
black
Yeah,
land,
yeah,
gentrification.
yeah,
Yeah, so I mean the criminality, but we could do this all night, my brother.
yeah.
So I do want you to respond to this one question and then just tell us what you got going on that we should be attentive to. So here's the question. I'm going to put it up.
What do you
What
think
do you
about
think
this?
about the use of black culture for them as a manipulation tool to isolate and separate the responses given?
If I understand the question, I mean, I think more than ever you see the attempt to, like for instance, we here in Black Alliance for Peace, we're working on we're doing analysis and organizing on data centers. And somebody was telling me actually about how in Chicago they're framing a data center as Afrofuturist.
God damn.
So can't make this shit up, right?
No. Back to Stranger Than Fiction. God
Yeah,
damn.
yeah. So there's a way that more than ever, again, I think even like we were talking about Allen's book, they will attach the kind of liberatory language, for lack of a better term, to a project that is not liberatory at all, to push it through, because this will actually benefit, you know, Black people in some kind of way, and it's Afrofuturist because it's our way to be a part of the future. You know, I don't know if they did this, but you know how Richard Pryor used to say you don't see Black people in movies in the future because white people don't think about Black people in the future.
Right.
So it's
They're not planning on bringing us.
right.
That's what he said.
So it's a way to be like, oh, we get to be a part of the future. We're not gonna get left behind. If
Yeah.
we, you know, we don't want to be what's the word? As a word, Luddites or whatever. So we don't
Yeah.
want to be
Yeah.
left behind. So there's a way. So Black culture is used to sell all kinds of primitive accumulation, right? Like it's used to sell a lot of bad things, but you put a Black face on it. And not just a Black face anymore. I think we need to move past as a Black. You got to put a Black, like not just a Black face, but a Black spin, like that to the point about culture. Used to be you might
Yeah.
be able to put a face, but there's certain Black people if you put in front of us, we're not even going for it, right? But if you put
Right. Right.
Megan Stallion on something, or you put Jay-Z or Beyonce, or you put like someone we feel a connection to, it's a much easier to sell it to us versus if it's just anybody
Right.
that might not work out as well, you know.
And if you put them in an image in a way in which they are manifesting the culture, the way they do the
Mhm.
street scenes when they had the cars rolling and you got the double dutch, that you do all of that. Okay, my brother. So thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate the work, the activism, the scholarship, the poetry, the whole piece. Do you have a summatory comment? My dogs are going crazy. Do you have a
No, it's fine.
summatory comment, or do you have some announcements that you want to share?
Again, thanks for having me on here. I'm glad this went well because I didn't get to prep like I wanted to, but I think we did fine. Just conversing over it. That's why it's always good to be happy. I'm always happy when I just do my regular study and it can show up in a conversation. But I think in terms of stuff we're working on, I know we're be on the lookout for some Pendleton 2 related work that's going
Okay.
towards the end of the month. There'll be some more public work we'll be doing on that front, that we'll be asking people for their participation, involved in some things in some actions we're gonna be doing on that front. Um, BlackMyths, we're gonna have an interview probably next week. I actually need to respond to email, but on a few things we're gonna do one on data centers. We're gonna do something on FIFA, and there's this paper that came out. I might call you for it. I don't know. I need to talk to somebody else besides just myself or my co-host. But there was this paper that came out about from transaction to transmission, 3 ways foundations can invest in Black-led nonprofits. I don't really care about how foundations can help necessarily, but the paper reveals a lot about the Black nonprofit world, research I had not seen before, and how
Hmm.
Black nonprofits that have under $1 million in revenue didn't actually see any bump at all in 2020. It was only the Black profits, so there was even a class difference in that. And I just was reading it a few weeks ago for a talk. I would just want to have some information. So we might go over that too, because I had not. If we ever do like a second edition, this will probably get added to it because I had not seen
Yeah.
a kind of breakdown of the Black nonprofit world. So those are the episodes we got coming up. Got to get on top of that soon. But other than that, just again, thanks for having me on here.
Thank you, brother. And I'm going to take you and I out and start playing my ending music. Call it a wrap. And thank you so much.
No, for
This was
sure. Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you.